Hi guys, I'm having a hard day, and I have no idea even if I'm going to post this. This is more so for myself. It's just so that the ideas can they can flow freely. I'm feeling very vulnerable. I thought I would at least get presentable for you and put on some makeup, but I'm realizing like my grandmother died this morning, and if I put on makeup for you guys, there's a possibility of me just starting crying in the middle of the video. And I figure if I cry without makeup, at least I look the same. Whereas if I cry with makeup, I could look very different afterward. Um, yeah, it's been a hard day, and I'm responding in a different way than I thought that I would. Um, God, I don't know if I want to look at myself right now. Not because I'm ugly, but it's like distracting. But then okay. Do you guys anyone use iMac or Mac like photo booth to take their videos? It's like weird. You have to look at yourself while you're recording, and I think it takes you out of the moment in a way. Okay. So yes, I've been crying a lot today, but not for the reasons that I thought that I would. I've been doing a lot of kind of sitting and reflecting and writing, and I think it was Alan Watts that said, if you really want to be inspired to be creative, contemplate death, contemplate dying and manure and nastiness if you really want to get creative. And I think he's spot on. Spot on. So I've been feeling like this is the least I can do as a sort of tribute, even if I just keep this on my computer and I don't share it. At least I can kind of have some peace knowing that I put this out there as a thank you to not just my grandma, but my grandpa too, who died last summer or the end of summer. This video might be long, and I'm just gonna go with it. So, whatever. Yeah, Alan Watts. If you want to get creative, contemplate death. And it's a January afternoon. It's super hot. It's like 85 degrees, which is weird considering it's been such a cold week. It's like my grandma died and all of her love just warmed up the space around us. And but along with that love, it's also very windy and dry, kind of to match the volatility of all the emotions that I'm feeling. And so because of that, my skin's really dry, and the tears sting because the saltiness kind of goes into the cracks of my lips and my skin, and the tears hurt, and it's almost like pain of some of the regret that I feel. The tears sting of regret. And it's not really a type of regret that like I caused necessarily. It's more of a regret that a dynamic existed within my family and my grandparents' family. It's more just a generational situation that kind of prevented us from, I don't know, maybe they could have lived longer if the dynamic was different, but things just are how they are right now. I didn't know either of my grandparents that well. There was a generational gap, obviously. I grew up in the U.S. They grew up there. In fact, I was the only one of their granddaughters, or I was the only granddaughter born in the U.S. So my Russian wasn't very good. I was also the youngest granddaughter by like at least 6 years, which isn't a lot now, but it is because I'm still like the baby granddaughter. And that was so there was an age gap, there was a cultural gap too. My grandparents were like Orthodox Christians. I'm not. So we didn't totally see eye to eye on a lot of issues, but we still loved each other, and that's really all that mattered. I spent many childhood summers. Someone is honking outside. I spent a lot of childhood summers in Russia. You know, I would go to school, and then the school year would end, and my mom and I, and sometimes my sister, would go to Russia, and there, you know, Russia would be like the hubbub where we all met in the summertime. It was beautiful, it was wonderful, and I really discovered a lot of myself there. And I think had I not had that experience, which I think is very different from a lot of the experiences that I think most American children grow up with, I would have turned out very differently. Perhaps I wouldn't have been as grounded, and I'm already not very grounded, but I think that childhood grounded me in a lot of ways and really contributed to my growth. And so when my grandpa passed away last summer, I felt sad because my mother was sad. I didn't really feel too sad because there was still a sort of thread to my childhood, and that was through my grandmother. Even though I didn't know her, she was the thread that connected me to my childhood. And now that she's gone, like it doesn't feel like I lost her per se. I feel like I lost a huge part of my childhood. And that's really what I've been grieving today and reflecting on and figuring out, what is it that I learned, and how can I take everything that I learned and experienced and bring that forward into the world that I'm in right now. Russia is not like the U.S., as you might expect. The way that we lived, we had two very polar opposite atmospheres in Russia that we lived in. And we had Moscow, we had this teeny tiny little flat. My mom, and every time we came to visit, my grandparents would move all of their stuff into the living room, which is where they would sleep. They would pull out the futon, and my mom and I would sleep in my grandparents' bed. It was just like this self-sacrifice that my grandparents would do upon our arrival, like this royal treatment of the guests. And I just kind of took that for granted, that your grandparents did that for you when you were so little. And I look back and I'm like, wow, they could have slept in their own beds, and we could have slept on the futon. Like that's how it would go in America. You come to visit, the couch gets pulled out, and the guests sleep on the futon, but not there. Grandparents would self-sacrifice for us. We would be the ones that got the privacy and like the really nice experience, and it was really, really a teeny tiny flat. But they had that flat ever since I was a little girl. That's all I remember. And my grandma would cook everything for us, my mom and I would go out during the day. We would go to the Red Square, we would go shopping, we would go to the mall, and go riding through the subways, and we would do even like the most mundane things, like going to the bank and going to the post office. And back then you went to an internet cafe if you wanted to get on the internet, and you had to pay money to go somewhere to find a computer and talk to your friends. And just crazy to think that people might, I don't think internet cafes even really exist now. We have phones. And then, okay, so that was Moscow, and we also had a dacha. And in the dacha, it was like a very rustic village that was also such a luxury for, I'm sure, my mom, who just wanted to escape. Technology now especially is crazy, and so that it's even more different when you compare life here in the US to the dacha in Russia. But back then it was still different. It was a real escape into nature, and we had electricity. That's about it. Running water, we didn't even have that. If you wanted running water, which we created running water, we would go to the well, and we would pull like 2, 3, 4, 5 gallons of water out of the well, and you'd have to carry it down the dirt road back to our house that my grandparents built from the ground up. I have no idea what's going to happen to that house now. Sad. And in order to get a shower, which we did like once a week or so, maybe twice a week if we got really stinky, you would have to carry the water up a ladder to the top of the shower house little thing, like a little wooden sauna thing that was built, and you had a boiler that you had to light a fire under, and that's how it took about an hour for all the water to be heated up, and everyone would have to take a shower that day, and everyone would go in a certain order, um, and and you didn't want to hog the water because it was limited. So you had to be pretty efficient, pretty quick. You would turn off the water if you weren't using it, and you didn't really want to be the last person to take a shower because there's a possibility that you would run out of hot water, and then you would either not have any water whatsoever. Actually, that's not true. You would have hot water and cold water. That's how you would regulate it to make sure you didn't just pour boiling, scalding water on you. You had faucets like hot water, cold water, but if you ran out of hot water, then you only had cold water left, and it sucked to be that person, even though we would only go in summertime and the water was never really that cold. It was kind of cold because it came out of the ground. I mean, it was so elaborate, and you would never, that's something you would never think about doing out here, and it's so special to think back on that now, and I crave that kind of, bare bones living. And it was enough. It was totally enough as it was. And my mom and I would sometimes get up at 5 in the morning, and my mom would tie a little bandana around my head and neck to protect me from mosquitoes. We were getting ready to go mushroom picking, and in Russia, the mushrooms, which ones are edible and which ones are not. And you can flip them over and smell them, and my mom would taste them. She would trust the earth so much, and we would get on our bikes and we would go riding for like 45 minutes in one direction with our baskets on the back. And I don't mean like bike basket. I mean like literally like one of those giant baskets weaved. We had lots and lots of those baskets. And you would also bring a knife with you. And sometimes you would lose the knife and you'd have to do everything with your hands. But then you would find knives in the forest that other people had lost, and it would become yours. And, and somehow my mom and I never lost each other in the huge forests in Russia. It'd be like, I'd basically be playing a version of Marco Polo. Yeah. And, once we had enough mushrooms, it's hard to say what enough was because you could go for 5 hours and we would never get bored. Sometimes we would even bring empty jars, and if they had wild blueberries, we would pick those too. It was really fun. We would have to now lug all of those mushrooms back on the highway on our bikes that we had to tie the basket full of mushrooms to. And ideally, you wouldn't go over any extremely crazy potholes or bumps that would cause either your basket to fly off of your bike. Hopefully you wouldn't fall off your bike, because then the mushrooms would all fall off and you'd have to pick them up and they'd all be broken. It's bizarre to think of living that way, that I did that. It's bizarre to think that I have done that. And then you come home and you would show off like the king mushrooms, the best ones that you found. They were called Bielia mushrooms, like these little fat white ones with little brown caps, and they were rated, and I don't say rated like a number system, but like based on grandma's response, like, oh, how beautiful of a mushroom. It was determined by the mushroom size, how clean it was, as if there were any bugs in it. It was determined by if it was big, if it was big and clean with no bugs and it was beautiful. It was actually a really good luck if you'd seen that like squirrel nibble marks. Like if you saw that a squirrel had taken a bite out of it, that meant it was a great, delicious mushroom. So it actually was better to have, and knowing that animals had been eating that mushroom, except for bugs. We didn't like bugs. But like rodents, if rodents had eaten it, it was a good sign. Whereas here, it's like if there's a slug on your piece of kale that you get at Ralph's, it's like, throw that piece of kale away. It was such a beautiful connection to nature, and it was so healing and so grounding. And guys, I don't know why I'm saying guys. I guess I'm already thinking I'm going to post this, even though it's probably going to end up being 30 minutes by the time I'm done or more. Every time I went to Russia and spent, weeks in the dacha, I would always come back 130 pounds. I was super thin, and I wasn't even eating like a vegan diet. It was just everything came from the earth or from the market that was so fresh, and we knew the farmers, and everything came from the earth down to the water that we brought out of the earth. And I didn't appreciate it so much until like right now, and it's hurting a lot. And I think a lot of it's because I don't think I'm going to go back. And even if I were to go back, of course, it wouldn't be the same. Like I said, it feels like a loss of childhood, even though I lost my childhood 15 years ago. I stopped being a child, but my last trip to Russia was right after college. And even then, I didn't go for very long. I don't know. I think a part of me knew back then that it might be my last trip. And on top of that, my Russian passport expired, and because I wasn't born in Russia, I wasn't able to renew the passport, but I also wasn't allowed to get a visa because I had been a citizen. And I could have gotten really aggressive with the Russian embassy and the Russian consulate, but something in me was like, my grandparents are dying, and I don't know them that well, and I don't really want to fight that badly, because the Russia that the childhood part of Russia, the stories that I knew and the stories that I created there with my mom, they wouldn't be there in the same way if I came back. It would be very different. It would feel different. Things are dying. And I don't mean like my grandparents are dying, just the old dynamics are dying. And as of today, it feels like they are dead. So if I were to go back to Russia, it would be in a completely different way. I would be staying with a friend instead of with my grandparents, and we would probably go to a different dacha. And if I stayed in Moscow, it would be more from a place of a tourist. It really wouldn't be the same. And when I did go, it's like I always went to Russia with a different struggle. Like I had always come into Moscow, like I always had either a boyfriend or a very strong crush. I don't think I'd ever gone to Russia without a boyfriend at home or a crush at home, unless I was like 5 or 6 or something. Like even starting in middle school, I had a little pseudo boyfriend. We never even held hands or anything, but we called each other boyfriend and girlfriend, even though we didn't do anything. And every single time I went, I missed a boy aggressively. I missed them so much that I didn't want to be in Russia at that time. I remember not wanting to be there. I wanted to be at home with these boys that I had been so infatuated or in love with at the time. And I think me being in Russia, missing these people, is exactly what I needed, because had I been in the US, I would have spent the summer with the boy, and what kind of lesson would I have learned compared to the lesson that I learned in Russia? The lessons that I learned in Russia were so much more powerful. I had to learn how to miss people. I had to learn how to entertain myself alone. I had to learn to sleep on a really old, uncomfortable bed. I had to learn to be uncomfortable with mosquitoes and learn how to, harvest my own food and grow it in a way and assist my family. And I learned how to do things I didn't want to do, and in the name of health or whatnot. And I learned how to live with nothing, really. It's funny because I look back and I think of the time as so abundant, because it was like I appreciated the earth so much, or at least I do now. But compared to what I have in this house, I had nothing. Running water. We created running water. We washed dishes with a basin, and you washed your body with a basin too. And yet it was so much because it was enough. And like I said, I would always lose so much weight and shed all this excess stress and all this excess weight caused by the stress. I was a lot healthier. I had no acid reflux, and much of my health journey was inspired by how wonderful and lively and healthy and happy I felt in Russia, even though I missed those boys. But I think I I experienced such an intense adolescent and teenage confusion during that time, and the amount of space I had away from everything gave me the space to feel all those emotions and really develop. I remember a lot of times I would just go out into the night, into the middle of the wilderness, because the wilderness is what was outside our little village. My family would trust me to go alone. You know, you could go to your friend's house, and because you didn't have a phone, you couldn't call him up. You just went, and either your friend was there or she wasn't. And if she was there, you hung out with her and whoever friends she had over. And if she wasn't there, you know, you left a message with her grandmother. Hey, Grandma, can you tell Tanya that I stopped by? And then you wouldn't play phone tag, you know, you would play like neighbor visit tag. And sometimes, you know, your friend would come back and you wouldn't be there. And then your grandma would tell you that your friend stopped by. And it's great. You know, I wish you could do that today. But you don't have your grandma living there with you, and that can hold that message for you. So I miss that. I miss that a lot. And the pain that I feel right now is a grief of really that blissful time when your neighborhood would get together and you would put on a play for all the grandparents. And a lot of these grandparents are gone. And along with that, the dynamic. And I think the regret that I felt was probably something that I'm not alone with. My sister talked about this too. Like, my grandparents' kids, like, left them. Not on purpose because they didn't love them, but my mom came to the US for a better life, and without that, she wouldn't have had me. My sister wouldn't have met her husband, and who knows? I mean, things might have been fine, but maybe this just is what it is, and I love the life that I have now. But, and then my sister's brother lives in London. He comes to Russia a lot, but because of that, my grandparents have really been alone. And my great-grandmother on my grandma's side, my grandma's mom, lived to the ripe old age of either 94, I think, and early 90s. And I think a lot of it was because she had generations of family living with her to support. But my grandmother and grandfather did not have that same sort of support. We had to hire someone to live and take care of them. But it's just not the same as having your kids there with you as you age. But I mean, what do? Do you move back to Russia to live with them and take care of them, or or do we bring them here to the U.S. with us, where they would not know the language or assimilate very well? And of course we could take care of them, but who knows? Maybe even the trip and the transition would be so much for them. And it's my grandparents both didn't even make it to like their 90s. They maybe got halfway through their 80s, if that. I don't know. I just don't know. But they definitely didn't make it within 10 years of what great-grandma had. And great-grandma had her family there, and my grandparents did not. And part of me wonders whether that's why they died at that age, even though it's like it seemed that it would be within their genetics to live that long. But I think when you are lonely and your family is not there, then the quality of the ending of your life is not the same. So I guess I'm looking at my little journaling thing. I went to Fashion Island. I had so much on my mind, and I just had to write it out. I was going to go paddleboarding, but like I said, it's really windy, and I don't have a whole lot of energy to paddle against the wind. I guess if there's a few things, there's so many things I learned from my grandparents, but I wrote down 3 big ones, and I'm sure things will come up in my head later, things that I learned, and the next few days will probably be me reflecting a lot still on what I can take with me, how I can take what I learned in Russia for my childhood on. The first thing would be that gestures matter so much more than words. And I think this happens in a lot of cultures, but my grandparents and my mom and my grandparents would bicker aggressively. And from someone like me in America, where you smile at people that you bump into and you say, "Good morning, how are you?" Like, we don't do like that. We don't do that in Russia. It's very suspicious, and everyone kind of keeps to themselves. And when they do talk, it's, it's friendly, but it's definitely more reserved there. And you don't just, you don't smile too much. And maybe it's changed, but it's noticeable. But sometimes my grandparents would argue, or my mom would argue with them, or even like just Russian families, they bicker, and sometimes they bicker loudly and angrily, and sometimes it would like get really escalated, and I would be really just distraught and be like, oh, like we would never say that in America to each other. And I would sometimes even confront my mom, like, why is it okay for grandpa to talk that way to grandma, and so on and so forth. And she's like, well, it's not, but it doesn't mean anything. And I was like, if someone said that to me, that would hurt a lot. And I think, and my mom said something along the lines of, this is a 10-year-old conversation, so I'm just making stuff up, but the gist of it was, it's really not the words that matter. And yes, those things are said, and maybe they're not the right ways to communicate, but that's all they know. And two, that's not what matters. What matters is that they keep showing up for each other. My grandparents were married for like almost 60 years. 60 years. And although they fought and argued, and my grandpa often belittled my grandmother, like, at least she showed up every day. They showed up for each other. They took walks together. They protected each other fiercely. They were loyal. That's what matters in Russian family. The words don't matter that much. It's showing up for each other. My grandparents talked a lot, really just over and over. Even through their dementia and Alzheimer's, my grandparents constantly berated me for getting an education. And I did. I was like, I got a bachelor's. Is that good enough? And I was like, and I think it was, yes, they wanted me to go to university, which I did, but it wasn't even so much that. It was just keep learning, because knowledge kind of is the seedling into wisdom, and without knowledge, you really have no leverage in the world to succeed, because without reading and getting an education, you're only as smart as the group that you associate with, and you're only as smart as the people you know, and you only know, the only knowledge you have is your friends and family's knowledge. So the only way to really elevate the mind and elevate your wisdom is to keep learning. My grandparents were both doctors, and they knew a lot, and a lot of the beginning hints that my grandmother gave were just do everything natural, stay away from chemicals. And when I was young, I was like, yeah, whatever, I'm young, I can handle anything. But she actually ended up being right. Like, it came down to, she would say, like, don't use tampons. Blood flow is supposed to come out. You don't want to push things back up. Makes sense now. She would say, stay away from birth control pills. When you have cramps or pain, don't use antibiotics. Don't take medicine. Like, find a way to heal it naturally. Let the body heal itself, and support the body so that it can heal itself. It's a very intuitive approach that, looking back, it means a lot. And then on the topic of going back to how couples communicated and argued, and family members argued, my grandmother in particular had the most selfless nature. I told you how she would, sleep on the couch so that we could have a really nice bed. But also, whenever she and Grandpa got in an argument, and it really wasn't an argument, like, he would just yell at her, and she would take it, and I would be like, why are you taking this shit? And because to her, it was I don't even know how to describe it, but she forgave so quickly and easily, and she responded with love and forgiveness. every single time, no matter what. Like, I don't even know, I can't do that. I can't forgive that quickly. But there is a lot to be admired from that. And, I think her anxiety over us being well is something that she's passed down to my mother to an extent, and that's been passed down to me. Like, I'm always worried about the people around me and whether people are eating healthy. My desire to feed the world, like feed animals and feed people that I love, even if they're not hungry, is something that's very just intrinsic in me. It's the way that I express my love, and I think I learned it from 2 generations ago. So love fiercely, forgive quickly and easily, and as often as you can. That's really hard to do, but it's sound advice. So, this is a lot. I'm gonna think about if I want to post this or not. I don't feel pretty, but I think this is what I just want to say. I don't know where, to whom, but it's what I got right now. So, thank you to my grandparents. Thank you to Russia. And, if and when I return to Russia, it'll be for a new reason. And it'll be because I'm letting go of something old and creating space for something new. And I'm sure that this, in some way, of some part of this storyline in my life, this is some kind of new beginning. So, if you watch this all the way through, thanks. You're never going to get this 30 minutes back, but maybe you'll get something out of it. So, if you're watching this, I love you. Thank you. Feel free to reach out to me anytime, because I'm holding so much space for myself right now. I'm just holding myself. I need a lot of love. But I also have a lot of love to give you. Okay, well, have a great day. And if I end up posting this, I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.